An immigrant janitor returned a lost wallet, unaware it belonged to the CEO who would change his life. Rafael Mendoza noticed it immediately. A small black leather square tucked between the trash can and the wall in the glossy 38th floor bathroom he was cleaning. His reflection fractured across the expansive mirrors as he bent to retrieve it, his brown uniform hanging loose on his thinning frame. The wallet felt heavy in his work-roughened hands. He opened it slowly, not to peek at its contents, but to find identification. 20 years in America had taught Rafael that returning lost things was both the right thing to do and often the most difficult. Immigration papers could be questioned. Questions led to problems. Problems led to starting over, again. His callous thumb brushed across an embossed business card. Lawrence Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, Hayes International Development. Rafael recognized the company name. It was emblazoned on the very building he cleaned each night, moving like a shadow through executive offices, while their occupants lived separate lives in faraway homes. Rafael slipped the wallet into his pocket. The night supervisor would know what to do with it. Better not to get involved personally. Better to remain invisible. Just 3 more floors, he whispered to himself in Spanish, the language he reserved for moments of private encouragement. His voice echoed slightly in the empty bathroom, a small comfort in the midnight silence that had become his companion. Outside the wall of windows, Manhattan glittered like scattered jewels on black velvet. So different from the dusty village in Guatemala where he'd grown up, where electricity still came and went with the predictability of summer rain. He pressed a hand against the cold glass, feeling the December wind pushing against the other side. Somewhere out there, his daughter Isabella was sleeping in the small apartment they shared with 2 other families, dreaming of the college acceptance letters that might never come because of 9 digits he couldn't provide on financial aid forms. Rafael's phone vibrated in his pocket. The ancient flip phone he kept because smartphones were expensive, and this one still worked. The text was from Mrs. Diaz, their elderly neighbor who watched Isabella at night. "She's coughing again." Fever. His stomach tightened. Isabella's asthma. The medicine that cost more than a day's wages. The hospital visits they couldn't afford. The insurance they didn't have. Rafael's fingers closed around the wallet in his pocket. He pulled it out, opened it again. Beyond the business card, crisp bills peeked from the leather folds. He counted quickly, over $300. $300 that could buy medicine, could give Isabella relief, could keep her out of the emergency room where they looked at him with thinly veiled suspicion when he couldn't produce insurance cards. His hands trembled as he stared at the money. 20 years of honest work, 20 years of never taking what wasn't his, 20 years of teaching Isabella that character mattered even when, especially when, life was unfair. Rafael closed the wallet and tucked it back into his pocket. The money wasn't his. The brief moment of temptation left him feeling hollow, ashamed. He finished his shift mechanically, the weight of the wallet heavy against his thigh. The night supervisor had already left. Budget cuts meant fewer management hours, leaving Rafael alone to clock out. He stood in the empty lobby, staring at the security desk where he could leave the wallet. But something stopped him. An inexplicable feeling that the wallet should be returned personally, with dignity, the way his father had taught him to look men in the eye when speaking truth. Rafael tucked the wallet deeper into his pocket and stepped out into the pre-dawn chill of December in New York City. Lawrence Hayes drummed his fingers on the polished mahogany of his desk, irritation mounting with each passing second. His assistant hovered in the doorway, clearly reluctant to deliver more bad news. "What is it now, Melanie?" Lawrence didn't look up from the quarterly report spread before him, red ink bleeding across projected earnings that had failed to materialize. "Your wallet, sir. It hasn't turned up." Lawrence's hand instinctively moved to his empty back pocket, a gesture he'd repeated countless times since discovering his wallet missing the previous evening. "I've already canceled the cards," he said, dismissing her with a wave. "Have it access my cloud backup for the other information." "Yes, sir." Melanie lingered, her hesitation palpable. "Something else?" Lawrence finally looked up, his steel gray eyes narrowing. "Security called. There's someone in the lobby asking for you. A janitor. He says he found your wallet." Lawrence leaned back in his chair, surprise momentarily replacing annoyance. "Send him up. He doesn't have clearance for the executive floors." "Security protocol. Then I'll come down." Lawrence stood abruptly, straightening his tailored suit jacket. "God knows I could use some good news today." The elevator ride to the lobby gave Lawrence precisely 47 seconds to compose himself. 47 seconds to push aside thoughts of the board meeting that morning, the disappointing quarterly reports, the ultimatum from investors, and the divorce papers waiting for his signature at home. 47 seconds to remember what gratitude felt like. The elevator doors opened to reveal the soaring lobby of Hayes Tower, all marble and glass and importance. And there, looking impossibly small against the grandeur, stood a man in a brown uniform, clutching something in work-worn hands. Lawrence approached him directly, bypassing the security desk. "You found my wallet?" Rafael Mendoza straightened his shoulders, meeting the taller man's gaze. "Yes, sir. Last night, in the bathroom on 38. Lawrence extended his hand, expecting the wallet to be placed in it. Instead, Rafael reached out and shook it, a firm, dignified handshake that surprised Lawrence with its confidence. "Rafael Mendoza," the janitor said, his accent wrapping around the words like gentle hands. "Lawrence Hayes." The formal introduction felt strange in this context, but Lawrence found himself responding to the simple human courtesy. "Thank you for returning my wallet." Rafael nodded, finally withdrawing the black leather wallet from his pocket and handing it over. "Everything is there." "I counted to make sure." Lawrence opened it, quickly verifying his driver's license, credit cards, and the cash he always carried. "You could have left this with security. Some things should be returned in person." Rafael's eyes, deep brown and steady, held Lawrence's for a moment before looking away. "It's the right way." Something in the simple statement caught Lawrence off guard. When was the last time he'd considered the right way? To do anything beyond legal requirements and profit margins? "Well, I appreciate it." Lawrence reached for his wallet, intending to offer a reward, but paused when he saw Rafael glance at his watch with poorly concealed anxiety. "You're late for something?" Rafael hesitated. "My daughter. She is sick. I need to check on her before my next job." "Your next job?" Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "You work somewhere else after your night shift here?" "2 more places." Rafael said it matter-of-factly without complaint. "Weekends too, sometimes." Lawrence found himself calculating. 3 jobs, night shifts, weekend work, while still noticing the janitor's straight posture, polished shoes, and clean, if worn, uniform. There was pride there and dignity that transcended circumstance. "Your daughter, is it serious?" Rafael's expression tightened. "Asthma. The cold makes it worse." Lawrence nodded, remembering his own childhood struggles with the condition before expensive specialists and medications had brought it under control. "How old is she?" 17. Senior in high school. For the first time, genuine warmth transformed Rafael's face. "Very smart. Top of her class." Lawrence found himself smiling in response to the father's evident pride. "She must take after her father." Rafael's smile faded slightly. "She works hard. Wants to go to college." There was something in the way he said it, a mixture of pride and pain, that made Lawrence ask, "But?" Rafael shook his head. "Dreams are expensive in America." The simple truth of the statement hung between them, highlighted by the opulent lobby surrounding them, the visible reminder of the vast distance between their worlds. Lawrence reached for his wallet again, this time with determination. "Let me give you something for returning this." "No." Rafael's response was immediate, almost sharp. "I don't want money for doing what is right." Lawrence stopped, wallet half open, struck by the quiet dignity in the refusal. In his world, everything had a price. Everything was a transaction. When was the last time someone had done something for him simply because it was right? "At least let me give you a ride home," Lawrence heard himself say. "It's the least I can do, and you can check on your daughter sooner." Rafael hesitated, clearly torn between necessity and pride. "Please," Lawrence added, surprising himself with his sincerity. "It would be my honor." Something in his tone must have convinced Rafael, who nodded once. A simple agreement between equals rather than employer and employee. "My car is in the executive garage." "This way." Lawrence led them toward a different elevator, one Rafael had cleaned countless times but never ridden. As they descended to the garage level, Lawrence found himself studying the man beside him. Rafael stood completely still, his eyes focused straight ahead, maintaining a careful distance that spoke of years learning to be invisible in spaces like this. Yet there was nothing subservient in his posture, only the careful navigation of unspoken boundaries. "How long have you worked in this building, Mr. Mendoza?" Lawrence asked as the elevator doors opened to reveal rows of expensive vehicles. 7 years. Rafael followed him toward a black Mercedes. Before that, other buildings. 20 years in New York. And before New York? Rafael's pause was brief but noticeable. "Guatemala." Lawrence unlocked the car with a click of his key fob, gesturing for Rafael to enter the passenger side. The janitor did so with visible reluctance, sitting carefully as if afraid to fully occupy the space. Where are we headed?" Lawrence asked, starting the engine. Queens, Jackson Heights. Raphael provided the address with precision. As they pulled out of the garage into morning traffic, Lawrence realized he'd never been to Jackson Heights. Despite living in New York for his entire adult life, there were entire boroughs that existed for him only as names on maps, places he passed through in private cars with tinted windows. They drove in silence for several minutes before Lawrence spoke again. You said your daughter is top of her class. What does she want to study in college? The question seemed to release something in Raphael. Medicine. She wants to be a doctor. Pride radiated from him. Since she was little, always taking care of others, even with her own breathing problems, always worried about everyone else. That's admirable. Lawrence navigated through traffic, aware of how rarely he drove himself anywhere these days. Has she applied to schools? Raphael's hands tightened slightly in his lap. Many applications. She is very organized. But the FAFSA, he trailed off. Lawrence knew enough about financial aid to understand the implication. Without a social security number, without legal status, federal financial aid was impossible. There are private scholarships. Lawrence offered, immediately aware of how insufficient the suggestion was. She has applied for many. Raphael looked out the window as they crossed the bridge, leaving Manhattan behind. But not enough for medical school. And the deadlines for deposits. He shook his head. We save what we can. As they drove deeper into Queens, the neighborhood changed. Smaller buildings, more diverse signage in multiple languages, streets bustling with early morning workers heading to jobs like Raphael's. Lawrence found himself seeing the city through new eyes, noticing details he would have overlooked from his usual removed perspective. When they turned onto Raphael Street, the contrast with the gleaming towers of Manhattan couldn't have been more stark. The apartment building was old but maintained with evident care. Small touches like swept steps and window boxes, speaking to residents who took pride in their surroundings despite limited resources. This is it, Raphael said as Lawrence pulled to the curb. Thank you for the ride. Lawrence put the car in park but kept the engine running. Mr. Mendoza. Raphael, please. Raphael, then. Lawrence turned to face him. I'd like to help your daughter, if I may. Wariness immediately replaced the momentary warmth in Raphael's expression. Why? The directness of the question caught Lawrence off guard. In his world, offers of help were rarely questioned. They came with enough strings attached that suspicion wasn't necessary. Because she sounds exceptional, Lawrence answered honestly. And because exceptional people should have the chance to achieve their potential. Raphael studied him for a long moment. With respect, Mr. Hayes, people like you don't usually help people like us without wanting something in return. The assessment was so accurate it was almost painful. Lawrence had spent a lifetime in transactional relationships, business deals, political alliances. Even his marriage had devolved into a series of negotiations and compromises with clear expectation of return. You count on him. You're right, Lawrence admitted, but you did something for me today that had nothing to do with what you might get in return. You returned my wallet because it was the right thing to do. Perhaps I'd like to experience what that feels like. Raphael's expression softened slightly, but caution remained. What kind of help? Before Lawrence could answer, Raphael's phone rang. The sharp sound of an old ringtone cutting through the tension in the car. Raphael answered immediately, speaking rapid Spanish, his expression growing increasingly concerned. When he hung up, he turned to Lawrence with newfound urgency. I must go up. Isabella's fever is worse. Let me come with you, Lawrence said, surprising himself with the offer. Raphael hesitated only briefly before nodding, his concern for his daughter overriding any other considerations. They climbed 4 flights of stairs in a narrow stairwell that smelled of cooking spices and cleaning products. Lawrence, despite his regular gym sessions, found himself slightly winded by the time they reached Raphael's floor. The apartment door was opened by an elderly woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a tight bun. She spoke rapidly to Raphael in Spanish, gesturing toward a doorway inside the apartment. The space was small but immaculately kept. Worn furniture carefully arranged, surfaces clean, walls adorned with a few framed photographs and what appeared to be academic certificates. Lawrence noted the partition dividing the main room, creating makeshift private spaces in what was essentially a single large room plus kitchen. Raphael moved immediately to the partitioned area, where a teenage girl lay on a narrow bed, her breathing audibly labored. Lawrence stood back, suddenly feeling like an intruder in this private family moment. Isabella, Raphael said softly, sitting beside her and placing a hand on her forehead. Mija, how are you feeling? The girl opened her eyes. They were her father's eyes, Lawrence noted, the same deep brown but brighter, sharper. "I'm okay, Papa," she whispered, though the effort of speaking triggered a coughing fit that belied her words. Raphael turned to the elderly neighbor. "Has she used the inhaler?" The woman nodded. "Twice already. Not much left." Raphael reached into his pocket, pulling out a small leather case that contained an inhaler. He checked it, his expression falling at what he saw. "We need to get a refill today." Isabella caught her father's wrist. "No, Papa. We should wait until next week. After you get paid." The simple exchange, a daughter's concern for family finances even while struggling to breathe, a father's helpless worry, struck Lawrence with unexpected force. In his world, medical care was a given, not a calculation. Lawrence stepped forward, no longer able to remain a passive observer. "Raphael, let me help." "Please." Both father and daughter looked up, noticing his presence fully for the first time. Isabella's eyes widened slightly, taking in the expensive suit, the watch, the obvious markers of wealth that made him so clearly out of place in their home. "Who's this, Papa?" she asked, her intelligent gaze assessing Lawrence with unconcealed curiosity. "Mr. Hayes," Raphael answered. "I found his wallet. He gave me a ride home." Lawrence moved closer, extending his hand to the girl. "Lawrence Hayes, your father did me a great service this morning." Isabella shook his hand, her grip surprisingly firm despite her illness. "He's always doing that, helping people." She smiled at her father with evident affection before another coughing fit overtook her. Raphael rubbed her back gently until the spasm passed. "I need to get your prescription filled." "I can have it delivered," Lawrence offered. "If you'll let me make a call." Raphael and Isabella exchanged a look, a silent communication between two people accustomed to making difficult decisions together. "Why would you do that?" Isabella asked directly, showing none of her father's deference. "You don't know us." Lawrence considered his answer carefully, aware that this bright young woman would detect any insincerity. "Because your father showed me kindness without expecting anything in return. Because you're clearly ill and need medication. And because sometimes the universe gives us opportunities to step outside ourselves and remember what matters." Isabella studied him for a long moment before nodding slightly. "He needs the prescription too," she said, gesturing to her father. "For his back. But he never fills it because mine costs so much." "Isabella," Raphael protested, embarrassment coloring his features. "It's true, Papa." Her gaze remained fixed on Lawrence. "He hurt his back 2 years ago. Slipped on a wet floor while cleaning. Workers' comp ran out after 6 months, but the pain didn't." Lawrence looked at Raphael with new understanding, noticing for the first time the careful way he moved, the almost imperceptible stiffness in his posture. "Let me make that call," Lawrence said quietly. "For both prescriptions." This time Raphael didn't protest. Whether from exhaustion, necessity, or some combination of both, he simply nodded, then provided the information for both prescriptions when Lawrence asked. Lawrence stepped into the kitchen to make the call, using his pharmaceutical company connections to arrange immediate delivery of both medications, charged to his personal account. When he returned to the bedroom area, he found Raphael sitting on the edge of Isabella's bed, speaking to her softly in Spanish. "The medicine will be here within the hour," Lawrence announced. "Both prescriptions with refills." "Thank you," Raphael said simply, the words carrying the weight of years of struggle. Isabella's gaze remained shrewd, assessing. "Why did you really come up here with my father, Mr. Hayes?" The directness of the question, reminiscent of her father's earlier inquiry in the car, made Lawrence smile despite himself. "I was going to offer him something, a proposition of sorts, but it can wait until you're feeling better." "I'm well enough to listen," Isabella insisted, pushing herself up into a sitting position despite her father's concerned protests. "And I want to hear what kind of proposition a CEO has for a janitor." The slight edge in her tone made it clear she was protective of her father, suspicious of Lawrence's intentions. He respected her more for it. "Actually, the proposition concerns both of you," Lawrence said, deciding that directness was the best approach with this family. "Your father mentioned you're top of your class, that you want to study medicine." Isabella nodded cautiously. "That's right. I have connections at several universities, including medical schools. I'd like to help you secure a private scholarship." The room fell silent. Isabella and Raphael exchanged another of their communicative looks. "Why?" Isabella finally asked. Lawrence considered several possible answers. Corporate social responsibility, tax benefits of charitable giving, good publicity, all the reasons he usually supported educational initiatives. None of them felt right, because talent shouldn't be wasted, he said instead. Because your father has worked in my building for 7 years, keeping it functioning. While I've never bothered to learn the names of the people who make my success possible. Because helping you become a doctor seems like a better use of my resources than most of the things I spend money on. Isabella's expression remained guarded, but Lawrence could see her weighing his words, calculating possibilities against risks. And what would you want from us in return? Raphael asked quietly. The question cut to the heart of Lawrence's own internal conflict. What did he want? The old Lawrence, the one who lived by transactions and calculated returns, would have had an answer ready. This new sensation, wanting to help without immediate benefit, was unfamiliar territory. Nothing, Lawrence said, the word feeling strange on his tongue. Or perhaps just this, the chance to see what happens when potential meets opportunity. Nobody does something for nothing, Isabella said, echoing her father's earlier sentiment. Lawrence found himself smiling at the family resemblance in their worldview. Perhaps I'm learning that some things are valuable precisely because they aren't transactions. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. The elderly neighbor answered it, returning moments later with a small pharmacy bag. Lawrence had made sure the delivery would be discreet, with no visible indication of his involvement. Raphael took the bag, checking its contents before handing Isabella her inhaler. She used it immediately, the relief on her face almost instantaneous as her breathing eased. Lawrence watched the simple medical intervention, something he took for granted in his own life, transform the atmosphere in the room. The visible easing of tension in both father and daughter's postures spoke volumes about how they lived, perpetually on the edge of crisis. I should let you rest, Lawrence said, suddenly aware of his intrusion into their private space. But I'm serious about my offer. May I have your contact information? I'd like to follow up once you're feeling better. Isabella reached for her phone, an older model but well cared for, and handed it to Lawrence. Put in your number. I'll text you so you have mine. The simple exchange, putting the ball in her court rather than insisting she provide her information to him, seemed to ease some of her wariness. Lawrence entered his private cell number, not the one his assistant screened, and handed the phone back. Raphael walked him to the door. In the narrow hallway, away from Isabella's keen observation, the janitor's exhaustion was more evident. Thank you, Raphael said quietly, for the medicine. For the ride. I meant what I said about helping Isabella. Lawrence responded. She's remarkable. Pride briefly overcame Raphael's fatigue. Yes, she is. And the offer extends to you as well. Lawrence added, there must be something you want for yourself. Not just for her. Raphael seemed genuinely puzzled by the question, as if the concept of wanting something for himself was foreign. I want her to have the chances I didn't have. That is enough. The simplicity of the answer humbled Lawrence. When was the last time he'd wanted something solely for someone else's benefit? I'll be in touch, Lawrence promised as he headed toward the stairs. Take care of yourself, Raphael. And your daughter. He felt Raphael's eyes on him as he descended, aware of how strange his presence must have seemed in this building, how out of place. Yet something about the visit had felt more authentic, more real than the board meetings and executive lunches that usually filled his days. As Lawrence emerged onto the street, the morning sun had fully risen, illuminating the neighborhood in clear winter light. His driver had arrived to collect the car. Lawrence had texted him the address while arranging the prescription delivery and stood waiting beside the Mercedes. Back to the office, sir? The driver asked, opening the rear door. Lawrence hesitated, looking back at the apartment building. No, he said finally. Take me home. I need to make some calls in private. 3 days later, Raphael was cleaning the executive restrooms on the 38th floor when his phone vibrated in his pocket. Isabella had texted, someone from Hayes Foundation called. They want to meet with us tomorrow. Is this real, Papa? Raphael stared at the message, a cleaning cloth still in his hand. He hadn't heard from Lawrence Hayes since that morning in their apartment. Part of him had expected the CEO's promises to evaporate like morning fog once he returned to his world of wealth and power. Another text appeared. They said Mr. Hayes personally arranged it. Something about a special scholarship program. Raphael's phone vibrated again, this time with an incoming call. The display showed a number he didn't recognize, with the Hayes Tower prefix. Hello? He answered cautiously. Mr. Mendoza. The voice was unmistakably Lawrence Hayes. I hope I'm not interrupting your work. No, sir. Raphael automatically straightened, as if the CEO could see him through the phone. I understand my foundation has reached out to your daughter about meeting tomorrow. I wanted to call personally to assure you this is legitimate. Raphael leaned against the sink, steadying himself. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Isabella just texted me about it. I've set up something I think might interest both of you, but I don't want to say more until tomorrow. There was something different in Lawrence's voice, an energy, an enthusiasm that hadn't been present during their first meeting. Can you both make it? I've arranged for it to be at 10 in the morning, assuming Isabella doesn't have school, and you could come before your shift. Yes, she has winter break now. Raphael hesitated. Mr. Hayes, I don't know how to thank you. No thanks necessary yet. Lawrence interrupted gently. Just come tomorrow and hear what we're proposing. If it doesn't feel right to you, there's no obligation. After confirming the details, Raphael hung up and stared at his reflection in the gleaming bathroom mirror. The face that looked back at him was the same, lined by years of labor and worry, eyes tired from too little sleep. But something had changed. A spark of what might have been hope, carefully guarded. He finished his shift methodically, his mind elsewhere. On the subway ride home, he found himself studying his fellow passengers. The night shift workers heading home, the early morning commuters heading in, wondering about their stories, their struggles, their moments of unexpected kindness. Isabella was waiting up when he arrived home, despite the early hour. She sat at their small kitchen table, laptop open, a notebook filled with her neat handwriting beside it. I've been researching the Hayes Foundation, she said without preamble. They have legitimate scholarship programs focused on first-generation Americans and children of immigrants. She turned the screen to show him a web page, but nothing specifically for undocumented students. Raphael set down his lunch container, noting the darkness under his daughter's eyes. You should be resting. I'm better now that I have medicine. She closed the laptop. Papa, do you think this is real? Or is he just, I don't know, feeling good about himself by pretending to help? The question reflected Raphael's own doubts, the cautious skepticism that had protected them both over the years. I don't know, he admitted, but we will find out tomorrow. Isabella nodded, accepting his answer. Either way, I applied to 3 more scholarship programs last night. She gestured to the notebook. There's still a path forward, even if this doesn't work out. Raphael felt pride swell in his chest. His daughter had inherited his determination, but had transformed it into something sharper, more focused. While he had spent 20 years surviving, she was planning to thrive. Come, he said, holding out his hand. Let's get some sleep before tomorrow. The Hayes Foundation occupied the entire 32nd floor of Hayes Tower. Raphael had cleaned these offices countless times, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces while foundation employees were long gone for the day. Entering through the main reception area with Isabella beside him felt surreal. They were expected. The receptionist, a young woman with a warm smile, greeted them by name and led them to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Mr. Hayes will join you shortly, she said, indicating the refreshments laid out on a side table. Please make yourselves comfortable. When she left, Isabella turned to Raphael with wide eyes. Papa, this is... I know, Raphael said softly, taking in the space that felt both familiar and foreign. He had dusted these very tables, emptied these very trash bins, but never sat in these chairs as an invited guest. Isabella moved to the windows, looking out over the city spread below them. You can almost see our neighborhood from here, she said, pointing toward Queens in the distance. Raphael joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. She had dressed carefully for the meeting. Her best blouse, her school blazer, hair pulled back neatly. He wore his only suit, purchased years ago for an immigration court appearance and carefully maintained since. The door opened behind them, and they turned to find Lawrence Hayes entering the room, accompanied by a woman carrying a tablet and a folder of documents. Raphael, Isabella. Lawrence greeted them warmly, extending his hand to each in turn. Thank you for coming. This is Diane Chen, our foundation director. The woman smiled professionally. It's a pleasure to meet you both. Raphael noted the changes in Lawrence since their last meeting. The CEO looked more rested, more present somehow. The controlled corporate mask had softened, revealing glimpses of genuine emotion beneath. Please sit. Lawrence gestured to the conference table. Once they were all seated, he continued, I imagine you're curious about why I've asked you here today. Isabella leaned forward slightly. The woman who called mentioned a scholarship program? That's right. Lawrence nodded to Diane, who opened her folder. We've created a new initiative, Diane explained, specifically designed for promising students facing immigration status challenges. She slid a document across the table toward Isabella. It's called the New American Potential Scholarship, providing full funding for undergraduate and graduate education, including medical school, along with living stipends and guaranteed internship placements. Isabella stared at the document, her expression carefully controlled. And this is real? Very real, Lawrence confirmed. Though I should be transparent, it's new. In fact, you would be the first recipient. Raphael watched his daughter closely, recognizing the conflict in her expression. Hope warring with suspicion, opportunity with caution. Why create this now? She asked Lawrence directly. Is it just because of my father returning your wallet? Lawrence didn't flinch from the directness of her question. That was the catalyst, yes. But the foundation has been considering programs for undocumented students for some time. Your situation highlighted the urgency. He leaned forward. Isabella, your academic record is extraordinary. Your personal essay, which your guidance counselor shared with us with your permission, demonstrates exactly the kind of commitment to service we want to support. Isabella glanced at Raphael, surprise evident in her expression. My guidance counselor knows about this? We needed to verify your academic standing, Diane explained. She was extremely supportive. Raphael finally spoke. The question he'd been holding back impossible to contain any longer. What is required of Isabella in return for this scholarship? Lawrence nodded, as if he'd expected the question. Maintenance of a 3.5 GPA, participation in foundation events as her schedule allows, and a commitment to consider working in underserved communities for at least 3 years after completing her medical training. That's it? Isabella's suspicion was evident. That's it, Lawrence confirmed. Though there is one other aspect to our proposal today. He turned to Raphael. This isn't just about Isabella. Raphael felt a sudden tension in his shoulders. I don't need anything. With respect, I disagree. Lawrence nodded to Diane again, who slid another folder across the table, this one toward Raphael. The foundation has an affiliated program for parents of scholarship recipients. It includes healthcare coverage, educational opportunities, and pathways to more sustainable employment, if desired. Raphael stared at the folder without opening it. I have jobs, 3 of them, with no benefits, no security, and physical demands that are worsening your back injury. Lawrence said gently, Raphael, I'm not suggesting charity. I'm offering an opportunity. The same thing you've worked so hard to provide for Isabella. Isabella reached over and opened the folder her father wouldn't touch. She scanned the documents quickly, her eyes widening. Papa, they're offering you a position as facilities operations manager for the foundation, with benefits, and ... She looked up at Lawrence. Immigration legal assistance? Lawrence nodded. For both of you. The foundation has excellent immigration attorneys on retainer. The room fell silent. Raphael felt something rising in his chest. A mix of emotions so complex he couldn't have named them if he tried. Pride, suspicion, hope, fear, gratitude, caution, all swirling together like water circling a drain. Why? The single word contained all his questions. Lawrence didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had lost the practiced smoothness of a CEO making a presentation. Because when you returned my wallet, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. He looked directly at Raphael. That integrity isn't transactional. That dignity has nothing to do with position or wealth. And that I've spent years building a company dedicated to developing human potential while ignoring the potential right in front of me. Raphael felt Isabella's hand slip into his under the table, a gesture of support they'd shared through countless difficult moments. This feels too good to be true, she said quietly. I understand your skepticism, Lawrence responded. So let me suggest this. Take the documents home. Review them with a lawyer if you wish. I'm happy to pay for an independent consultation. Talk it over. There's no deadline pressing on this offer. Raphael finally opened his folder, running a calloused finger over the employment contract inside. I don't know if I'm qualified for this position. You've effectively managed multiple facility operations for years, Lawrence pointed out. You understand the building systems better than most of our engineers, and you have something we desperately need, perspective from outside the privileged bubble most of us live in. The meeting continued for another hour, with Diane explaining the details of both programs. Throughout, Raphael remained mostly silent, letting Isabella ask the practical questions while he observed Lawrence. The CEO's enthusiasm seemed genuine, his answers direct and transparent. When they finally rose to leave, Lawrence walked them to the elevator himself. Take your time deciding, he said as they waited for the car to arrive. But know that I believe in both of you. This isn't charity, it's investment in exceptional people. In the elevator after the doors closed, Isabella turned to her father. What do you think, Papa? Raphael stared at the folder in his hands. I think, He paused, searching for words. I think sometimes life offers unexpected doors. The question is whether we are brave enough to walk through them. Isabella slipped her arm through his. Together? Always together, he answered, the certainty in his voice matching the newfound hope in his heart. 6 months later, Raphael stood in the doorway of his new apartment, watching as Isabella packed the last of her things for her summer program at Columbia University, the first step in her journey toward medical school. The scholarship had become reality, along with everything else Lawrence had promised. Raphael's new position at the Hayes Foundation had transformed their lives in ways he was still adjusting to. The steady income, the healthcare benefits that had allowed him to finally address his chronic back pain, the 2-bedroom apartment they no longer had to share with other families, the immigration attorneys working diligently on their case. But the most profound change wasn't material at all. It was the weight that had lifted from his shoulders, the constant, grinding anxiety of precarious existence that he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. "Papa, have you seen my blue notebook?" Isabella called from her bedroom, her own bedroom, with a desk for studying and shelves for her books. On the kitchen counter, he answered, smiling at her familiar forgetfulness that persisted despite her organizational skills. His phone buzzed with a text message from Lawrence. "Still on for dinner Friday?" Bringing the proposal for the expanded scholarship program. In the months since their meeting, Lawrence had become more than a benefactor. A genuine friendship had developed between them, surprising them both. Their weekly dinners had become a fixture in both their lives, sometimes at expensive restaurants where Lawrence was known by name, sometimes at small family-owned places in Queens that Raphael introduced him to. Lawrence had changed too. Raphael saw it in the way he interacted with service workers, in his growing interest in immigration policy, in the gradual shift of the Hayes Foundation's focus toward more direct community investment. The CEO admitted freely that returning the wallet had been the catalyst for his own personal transformation, a reconnection with values he'd set aside in his pursuit of corporate success. Isabella emerged from her room with her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Ready?" Raphael hugged her tightly. "Call me tonight when you're settled in. It's just the summer program, Papa." She laughed. "I'm not going far, and I'll be home on weekends." "Still," he insisted. "Call your father." She nodded, serious for a moment. "I will. And Papa? Thank you for everything." Raphael shook his head. "No thanks needed. Just make the most of this opportunity." "I will." She glanced around their apartment, at the framed acceptance letter from Columbia hanging on the wall, at the family photos now prominently displayed rather than tucked away. Who would have thought finding a wallet would change everything? Not the wallet, Raphael corrected gently. Returning it. As he watched his daughter leave for her program, Raphael thought about the thin line between hardship and hope, how quickly life could pivot on seemingly small decisions. He thought about Lawrence, who had found something he hadn't known he was missing. He thought about Isabella, stepping confidently toward a future that once seemed impossible. And he thought about himself, the invisible janitor who had become visible, not just to a CEO, but to himself. The man who had done the right thing not because it might be rewarded, but because it was right. Outside their window, New York City stretched in all directions, a landscape of possibility and connection he was only beginning to fully see. Raphael placed his hand on the glass, feeling the warmth of summer sunshine from the other side. For the first time in 20 years, the city felt not just like a place where he worked, but like a place where he belonged. Sometimes the smallest acts of integrity can open the largest doors to transformation. Sometimes returning what is lost helps you find what you never knew you were missing.